can hear the sounds coming from inside my grandmother's house before I even reach the front porch. Music. Laughter. The low murmur of conversation and the high-pitched shriek of my cousin's kids running through the hallway. All the sounds of a family gathering I was apparently not supposed to be part of. I knocked anyway. My mom answered the door. She cracked it maybe 6 inches, enough to show her face but not enough to let me in. And for a second, she just looked at me. Then she looked at my daughter. "Olivia," she said. My name, not a greeting. A problem. "Hey, Mom." I kept my voice steady. "We drove 2 hours. Is Gran inside?" She shifted her weight, blocking the doorway more with her shoulder. "It's a small gathering. We weren't expecting you." I had been invited. I had RSVP'd 3 weeks ago. I had texted my aunt the week before, confirming we were coming, and she had sent back a thumbs-up emoji and a little Christmas tree. My daughter, who was 7, had picked out her dress herself and asked me 4 times on the drive if Gran would like it. "You weren't on the list," my mom said. "Not on the list. For Thanksgiving dinner. At my grandmother's house." I looked at my daughter. She was standing just behind me on the porch step, holding a casserole dish covered in foil with both hands, because I had asked her to carry it and she had been so careful about it the entire drive. She was looking at my mom with this expression I recognized, this trying to understand expression she gets when something doesn't make sense to her yet. "Okay," I said, "because what else do you say to that on a November night standing on your grandmother's porch with your 7-year-old and a sweet potato casserole?" We walked back to the car. I buckled her in. She didn't say anything for a moment, and neither did I, because I was trying to figure out what to say. I was trying to find the version of this that wasn't going to hurt her. "Mom," she said, "does Gran know we're here?" "I don't think so, baby." She was quiet for another few seconds, looking out the window at the house. The porch light was on. Someone had put a wreath on the door. "Does Gran not want to see us?" And that was it. That was the question I couldn't answer without crying in a parking lot at 7:30 on a Thursday night. So I just reached back and held her hand for a second and said, "I don't know, sweetheart." I put the car in reverse. Let me back up, because none of this started at Thanksgiving. This started when I was 11 years old and my parents sat me down and told me they were getting divorced, and my dad moved to Phoenix, and my mom moved us into her parents' house for 2 years while she got back on her feet. And those 2 years were how I learned the difference between the way my grandmother looked at me and the way she looked at my brother. My brother's name is Scott. He's 4 years older than me, and he has my dad's jaw and my mom's eyes and my grandfather's name as his middle name. And from the time he was born, my grandmother treated him like he was something rare and irreplaceable. She kept his Little League photos in the living room. She drove 40 minutes to every one of his high school basketball games. When he graduated college, she threw him a party at her house with catered food and a slideshow. When I graduated college, she sent me a card. I'm not saying this to make her sound like a villain. I loved my grandmother. I still love her. She is one of those women who came up in a generation that believed sons carried the family and daughters married into other families. And she never really examined that belief, just lived inside it the way you live inside a house you've stopped noticing. She was warm. She was funny. She made the best pecan pie in the county. She just also had a blind spot roughly the size of my entire existence. My dad was never really in the picture after Phoenix. He remarried when I was 15, had 2 more kids, sent birthday cards about half the time. I stopped expecting much from him somewhere around my junior year of high school. My mom did what she could, which was sometimes a lot and sometimes not very much, depending on what was happening with her and my stepdad. My stepdad is named Ray. He and my mom got married when I was 16, and he's fine. He's never been cruel to me. He's also never made any particular effort. I always got the feeling that he married my mom and got my brother as a bonus and got me as a footnote. I put myself through college. Loans, scholarships, 2 jobs my sophomore year. I became a physical therapist. I bought a small house when I was 29, a starter home in a decent school district, because I found out I was pregnant at 28 and the guy involved made it extremely clear he was not interested in being a father, so I made my plan and I executed it. My daughter's name is Stella. She is the best thing I have ever done, and she knows it, and I do not plan to stop telling her. My brother, meanwhile, took a different path. Not a bad path exactly. just one that required a lot of external support. He majored in business and graduated with a 2.4 GPA and got a sales job that he described as a stepping stone and then a temporary situation and then just something he was doing until his startup took off. The startup was an app idea that changed 3 times in 4 years. My grandmother gave him $40,000 for it. She told me about it at Easter like she was telling me about a new recipe she'd tried. He bought a boat with part of it. He married a woman named Christine 2 years ago. Christine is beautiful and says things like, "We're really focused on manifesting abundance right now," and has never once asked me a question about my life. They live in a 5-bedroom house in the suburb where my grandparents used to live, and when I asked my brother once how they afforded it, he sort of looked at the ceiling and said Gran had helped with the down payment. Gran had also helped with the furnishings, I found out later, and the car Christine drives. I want to be very clear that I am not someone who spends a lot of time being bitter. I built something from nothing and I am proud of it. I have a good job, a house I own, a daughter who reads above grade level and plays soccer and said, "Actually, that's a common misconception," to her 2nd grade teacher last spring, in a way that was somehow both rude and completely correct. I don't need my grandmother's money, but I did need my grandmother to see me, and she never quite managed to do that. The call came at 8:14 on Thanksgiving night. I was parked in the lot of a diner about a mile from Gran's house because Stella had stopped crying and said she was hungry and I was not going to make her drive 2 hours home on an empty stomach. We had ordered hot chocolate and grilled cheese sandwiches and she was drawing on a paper placemat with the crayons they brought us, and I was staring at my phone and trying to decide whether to call anyone or just absorb this quietly. My phone rang. Gran. I picked up before it rang a 2nd time. "Where are you?" Her voice was different than usual. Sharper. She's 81, and she has a soft way of speaking most of the time, a gentleness from a lifetime of being the person who held things together. But tonight, she sounded like someone had handed her a mission. "About a mile away," I said. "At the diner on Clearwater. You come back here right now." "Gran Olivia, I am asking you, come back." I looked at Stella across the table. She had colored the turkey on her placemat purple and was now adding what appeared to be a hat. "Stella, honey," I said, "can you put that in a to-go box?" My grandmother was waiting on the porch when we pulled up. She had her cardigan on, the heavy one she keeps by the door, and she was standing with her arms crossed, not in an angry way, but in the way she does when she's holding herself together. When she saw us get out of the car, she walked down the steps faster than I've seen her move in a long time. She hugged Stella first. Long and tight, the way you hug someone when you're apologizing for something they're too young to understand. "I didn't know," she said to me over Stella's shoulder. "I did not know you weren't in there." I believed her. That was the thing. I believed her completely. She had believed I was already inside. My mom had told her I wasn't coming, that I had called to cancel. I had made no such call. The next part is where things become something I'm still processing, if I'm being honest. We went inside. The dinner was mostly done, but there was still food out and someone had saved a plate in the kitchen, and Stella sat down and ate her turkey next to my cousin's daughter. And within about 4 minutes, they were thick as thieves talking about some show they both watched on Netflix. Because children are extraordinarily good at recovering from things that would destroy adults. My grandmother took me into the den, closed the door, sat down across from me in my grandfather's old armchair, the green leather one that's been there since I was a little girl. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. Not just tonight. I told her about the RSVP, about the text to Aunt Donna, about the fact that this was not the first time something like this had happened, not the first gathering I'd been quietly shuffled out of, not the first time plans I'd confirmed seemed to unconfirm themselves without my knowledge. I told her about Stella asking me in the car if Gran didn't want to see her. I said that part quietly because it was the part that cracked me open and I did not want to cry in front of her right now. I needed to be able to finish saying it. My grandmother was quiet for a long time after I stopped talking. "Your mother told me you'd been distant," she said finally. "She said you weren't returning calls, that you were going through something and needed space." She paused. "I should have called you myself. That's on me. I should have picked up the phone. It landed differently than I expected. She wasn't making excuses. She was sitting in her own accountability right next to me. I've also let some things go on too long, she said. With Scott, with how this family treats you. I knew, and I told myself it would work itself out, and it didn't because those things never work themselves out. I didn't say anything. I found something, she said. Last week, when I was going through some papers, your mother has been telling me for 2 years that you refused a check I sent you when Stella was born. That you said you didn't need my help and it was insulting of me to offer. I stared at her. I never received a check, I said. And I never said anything like that. I would never say that. Gran nodded slowly. She looked like someone doing a calculation they already knew the answer to and were just confirming. I know, she said. I know that now. The thing about old houses and old families is that they accumulate things. Papers, records, a paper trail that nobody thinks about because nobody plans to need it. My grandmother is 81 and meticulous and old-fashioned, and she keeps carbon copies of every check she writes in a ledger book in her desk drawer. She keeps receipts. She keeps notes. She had written me a check for $2,000 when Stella was born. She had put it in an envelope with a card and given it to my mother to mail because her hands had been bad that week and she hadn't wanted to drive to the post office. The check had been cashed. Not by me. She had found the carbon copy, had gone and looked at the bank records the way you can do online now, even if you're 81, and had to call your neighbor's grandson to show you how. The check had been cashed 11 days after it was written. She did not know yet who had cashed it, not for certain, but she had some thoughts. She also had, it turned out, some other thoughts she'd been sitting with. About the $40,000 to Scott's startup, about the down payment, about the ongoing pattern of what she described in her careful 81-year-old way as resources flowing in one direction. I love your brother, she told me, but I have not been fair to you, and I have been naive in ways I'm not proud of. I'm going to tell you what happened in that living room because it happened, and it was real, and I have thought about it every day since. Gran came out of the den and asked everyone to stay seated. That was all she said. The way she said it, nobody moved. There were about 15 people there. My mom, my stepdad Ray, Scott and Christine, Aunt Donna, a few cousins, my grandmother's neighbor Phyllis, who shows up to every gathering because she's been doing so for 40 years and nobody has the heart to tell her she's not technically family. Gran stood in the middle of the room with her hands folded in front of her, and she said she had something to tell everyone, and then she told them. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse dramatically. She told the facts in the sequence they happened, the way you'd explain something to a judge if you needed them to understand quickly and clearly. She said she had written a check that did not reach its intended recipient. She said she had discovered certain information about the family's financial arrangements that she intended to address more fully in the coming weeks with her attorney. She said she had also learned that someone had told Olivia she wasn't welcome at this dinner tonight on her behalf without her knowledge or consent. My mother started to say something. Gran held up one hand. Just one hand, quiet and flat, and my mother stopped. I am not finished, Gran said. She said that going forward, certain things were going to change. She said she had spent too many years allowing imbalances to exist in this family that she had the power to correct and had not corrected. She said she was sorry to Stella, who was sitting at the kids' table and didn't entirely understand what was happening, but who heard her name and looked up with her dark eyes and nodded very seriously the way she does. Then Gran looked at my mother directly and said, "You told me she didn't want to come. You told me she'd been pulling away. I am asking you now, in front of everyone, if any of that was true." My mother looked at her plate. That was its own kind of answer. Phyllis, to her credit, reached over and quietly refilled her wine glass and looked at nobody. The weeks after Thanksgiving were not clean or tidy. Family things never are. There were phone calls. There were texts that I didn't reply to and some that I did. My brother called me once and we had a conversation that was mostly him explaining his perspective for 45 minutes and me listening. And at the end of it, I said, "I hear you, Scott," and hung up. Because there's nothing you can say to someone who has benefited from a system their whole life and is only now being asked to examine it. My grandmother hired an attorney. I don't know all the details and she didn't ask me to be involved in them. What she told me was that she was making sure things were put right and that she wanted me to know that going forward, the way her estate was structured would reflect what she actually intended and not what she had been led to believe. She also, in December, mailed me a check. She mailed it herself this time, handed it to the postal worker at the counter, and kept the receipt. Inside the envelope was a card that said, in her handwriting, "For Stella's college fund. No detours this time." I sat in my driveway and cried for about 15 minutes. Then I went inside and put it in the fireproof box where I keep the important documents. What I think about now is the silence in that living room when Gran put her hand up. Not the noise, not the confrontation, but the silence. The way everyone in that room recalibrated in real time. The way Christine looked at Scott and Scott looked at the tablecloth, and my stepdad Ray suddenly found something extremely interesting happening just outside the window. I think about Stella at the kids' table, hearing her name from her great-grandmother's mouth and nodding like she understood the gravity of it, even if she didn't understand the details. I think about what it cost my grandmother to stand up in her own living room at 81 and say, "I was wrong about some things, and I am going to make them right." Most people don't do that. Most people choose the path that lets them keep believing they were always fair, always loving, always the hero of their own story. She chose the harder thing. I am not going to forget that. Thanksgiving is coming again. She called me last week to confirm we were coming, called me herself on my cell phone, and when I said yes, she said good and then asked to speak to Stella, who told her at length about the science fair project she's doing on bioluminescence in the deep ocean. "She's something," my grandmother said when Stella finally handed the phone back. "She really is," I said. "Comes by it honestly," Gran said. I drove home that night through the dark November streets with Stella asleep in the back seat and the radio on low, and I kept thinking about what my grandmother said. Comes by it honestly. A small sentence. The kind of thing you say without thinking. But sometimes the small things are the ones that have been waiting the longest to be said. This year we're bringing the sweet potato casserole again. Stella asked if she could add marshmallows to the top. I said yes. She has been talking about it with a level of enthusiasm that suggests she may be underestimating how much the adults in this family are going to debate that choice. I cannot wait. I've been thinking a lot about what it actually takes to change the direction of a family, not fix it. I don't think families get fixed the way you fix a leaky faucet, but change the direction. Tilt something that's been leaning the wrong way for decades, just enough that the next generation doesn't inherit the same damage. What I know is this. The night my mom told Gran I wasn't on the list, she believed she was safe. She had done this kind of thing before, quietly and successfully, and nothing had come back to her. That's the thing about getting away with something over and over. You stop believing there are consequences. You start to think the world has simply agreed that the rules don't apply to you. But Gran had been watching longer than anyone realized. She had her ledger books. She had her carbon copies. She had 40 years of observing this family up close, and somewhere along the way, she had started adding things up. I wasn't the variable that changed the equation. I was just the moment the equation finally became too obvious to ignore. I think about Stella in the backseat of that car asking me if Gran didn't want to see us. 7 years old, asking that question in the dark. She deserved better than that moment. I deserved better than that moment. And the fact that I had done everything right, the RSVP, the text to my aunt, the 2-hour drive, the casserole she had carried so carefully, none of it protected us from someone who had decided to exclude us anyway. That used to make me feel powerless. Now it makes me understand something I didn't before. You cannot control what people do in the dark. You can only control who you are in the light. I put myself through college. I bought my house. I raised Stella on my own, without asking anyone for a safety net. Not because I had something to prove, but because that was what the situation required, and I was capable of meeting it. I didn't do those things to earn love from people who were withholding it. I did them because building something solid is its own answer to people who expect you to fail. Gran, standing in that living room and telling the truth, that cost her something. She had to admit she'd been fooled. She had to admit she'd let things slide. At 81, in front of her whole family, she chose honesty over comfort. And I will carry that image for the rest of my life. Not because she vindicated me, though she did, but because she modeled something I want Stella to see, that it is never too late to correct course and that the people who actually love you will do it even when it's hard. The check she mailed me, the one she handed to the postal worker herself and kept the receipt for, is sitting in a fireproof box in my closet. The card inside said no detours this time. I read it again sometimes. It is the most my grandmother has ever said to me in 6 words. What I want Stella to understand, someday when she's old enough for the whole story, is that being treated unfairly is not evidence that you are worth less. It is only evidence about the person doing the treating. She came by her stubbornness honestly. She came by her ability to recover and keep going honestly. The purple turkey with the hat, the bioluminescence science fair project, the way she said, actually, that's a common misconception to her 2nd grade teacher. All of it is her own. Nobody gave it to her. Nobody can take it back. We're bringing the casserole again this year. Marshmallows on top, because she asked and I said yes. Some things are exactly that simple.